Okay, we start the Gemara today in Yud Amud Beis, the next part of the Mishnah that we learned in the beginning of the Masechta. What did it say there? Im yesh lo itzuras haPesach, if you have an opening of the Mavi that's very wide, af al pi she'rochav meser, even if it's more than 10 amas wide, ein tzarich l'mayit. You don't have to minimize the opening if there's a tzuras haPesach at the fourth side at the opening of the Mavi. Sagt the Gemara, Ashkechan tzuras haPesach, the mahanya berachbai. So we see over here in the Mishnah that if you have a tzuras haPesach in a case where the opening is very wide, so that works. You don't have to minimize it. And then we also find va'amaltere the mahanya begova. If you have an amaltere, which is some kind of a design we had before, if it's a design colored of bird nests or whatever it is, that design works if it's very high, if it's more than 20 amas high. But the question is, ipche mai. If it's the other way around, what would be the din? And as Rashi and Tosfos explain, right over here, the Gemara's question is, what would happen if you have a tzuras haPesach for the height? You have a very, very tall opening, very tall walls, and you place a tzuras haPesach on this very tall opening. So does a tzuras haPesach also work if it's very high? Tashema, so the Gemara answers, the Tanya, we learned clearly in a Braisa, Mavi shugavaya me'esrim ama, a Mavi that's taller than 20 amas, you mayit, you have to bring it down. But v'im yesh le tzuras haPesach, if you place a tzuras haPesach there, then ein tzarich l'mayit, then you don't have to bring it down. So it says clearly in the Braisa that a tzuras haPesach helps for this. Now the Gemara's question is amaltere berach by mai. Similarly, using an amaltere, using some kind of a decoration, if it's too wide, would that be good as well to get people's attention? Ta shema. So we learned in a Braisa, the Tanya, mavi shugavaya meser mama yemayit. If it's taller than 20 amas, you have to bring it down. Varochav meser. And if it's wider than 10 amas, you might. You also have to make it less. V'im yesh le tzuras haPesach, einay tzarich l'mayit. If it has a tzuras haPesach, then you don't have to minimize the opening. And then it says, v'im yesh le amaltere. If you have this amaltere, then also einay tzarich l'mayit. You don't have to minimize it either. My love, asayfet. Don't you think when it says here about the amaltere, it's also going on the width, because that's where it's placed in the Braisa. So the Gemara, not necessarily, even though it says it in the Sefer, but areisha. The amaltere goes back to the reisha. Amaltere only works b'negea to the height. It doesn't work b'negea to the opening and the width. So the Gemara, masni le Rav Yehuda lechiyah barav kamei de Rav. Rav Yehuda was learning to chiyah barav in front of Rav. Our Mishnah. And he read what it said in the Mishnah, that if you have a tzuras haPesach, ein tzarich l'mayit. Then you don't have to minimize the width of the opening if it's more than 10 amas. Amalei, so Rav commented and said, no, asnei tzarich l'mayit. You have to learn in the Mishnah that even with a tzuras haPesach, it doesn't help. If it's more than 10 amas wide, you have to minimize it. We had this on Daf Beis Amud Beis. The Gemara mentioned it there. That Rav held that a tzuras haPesach does not help for the opening of the Mavi being too wide. Omer Rav Yosef, so Rav Yosef learns out from this, Midivrei Rabbeinu Nilmad, from the words of Rav, we could learn out, Chotzer, what happens if you have a Chotzer? So a Chotzer is a place that's enclosed from all four sides. But over here, what kind of Chotzer is this? Sheruba Psachim V'chaloinis. It has a lot of windows in it. Most of it is actually windows and doorways and openings. Eino niteres b'tzuras haPesach. So if it has a tzuras haPesach, if these openings are made up of a tzuras haPesach, that's not going to be matter to be able to carry inside this chotzer. So the point is, what's the halacha usually by a chotzer? The halacha by the mechitzis of a chotzer is, it has to be oimid merube ala paretz. The closure has to be more than the breach. So if you have a chotzer and the wall around it has so many openings, it's full of windows and full of doors. So then the parot, the opening, is more than the closure. Okay, but what happens if the openings that you have is a tzuras haPesach? So it's maybe you could rely on the tzuras haPesach that it should be like it's closed off. So what the Gemara is saying is, just like we said now, b'negeya to the opening of a mavi when it's more than 10 amas, I don't rely on the tzuras haPesach. Or when it's more than 10 amas, I don't rely on the tzuras haPesach. So to b'negeya to a chotzer, I don't rely on the tzuras haPesach. And the Gemara says the comparison here. My time, what's the reason? When it comes to an opening by the mavoi that's more than 10 ames, so that's a problem by a mavoi, right? And when you have breaches in the walls of a chatzar that is more than the closure, it's also a problem in a chatzar. So just like you're saying regarding the issue of an opening that's more than 10 by a mavoi, that a tzuras pesach will not help for it. So the same thing is also benigayah to the issue of having a breach in the chatzar that's more than what's there in the closure. A tzuras pesach will not help for it. Tzuras pesach does not work if we don't rely on the tzuras pesach by the mavoi when it's too wide open. So we don't rely on the tzuras pesach also benigayah to the chatzar when it's too much of an opening. If you want to see the picture in the chatzar where it's a bunch of windows and a bunch of openings, so you can take a look and picture Kuf Yud Aleph. So you see over here it has a lot of openings and doorways, a lot of windows, but all of those openings in the doorways have a tzuras pesach. So the question is, could you rely on that tzuras pesach to be able to carry inside? So right now the Gemara is saying, according to Rav, just like regarding a mavoi that has a very wide opening, you don't rely on it. The same thing also when you get to the chatzar, because it's more breaches than closure, so you don't rely on it. So does a pesach either. Zog the Gemara, no, not necessarily is this a comparison. There's a difference. Zog the Gemara, there's a difference when it comes to the opening of a mavoi that's more than 10 ames, that is a isser by a mavoi. Shekain lo hitarta boy eitzel pasibirois. That kind of an opening, that wide of an opening, that's more than 10 ames. When it comes to the opening by the pasibirois, we learned about this yesterday, right? When you have a boy in the middle of the Rishus HaRabim, and the Chachamim said that you could place at the corners, you can place boards at the corners to enclose it. So if you have this kind of opening that's more than 10 ames, so loy hitarta boy eitzel pasibirois lit Rav Meir. According to Rav Meir, the space of an opening that could be between one board and another board is only 10 amas, not more than 10 amas. Yesterday we actually learned that it could be 13 amas and a third. But now the Gemara is quoting a different opinion, which is the opinion of Rav Meir, that it could only be 10 amas, not more. So what do we see? When it comes to the opening of a mavoi, so what are we talking about? Yaisemi Eser, that's Eser by a mavoi. Shekain lo hitarta by eitzel pasibirois le Rav Meir. According to Rav Meir, so there's no heter if it has an opening that's more than 10. On the other hand, this problem that you have now with the chatzar, which is what? That it's paretz merub ala that the breach is more than the closure. Regarding pasibirois, there's definitely a bigger breach than the closure. The closure is just in the corners, and the breach is the entire middle is totally open, and that's something that we're more makel about. And according to everybody. So what's the point the Gemara is trying to make here? What's a bigger problem? Is it a bigger problem if you have an opening of 10 amas, or is it a bigger problem if you have an opening of paretz merub ala oimid? The opening of 10 amas, more than 10 amas, is a bigger problem. V'haraya by pasibirois, that's a problem. The opening of paretz merub ala oimid is not such a big problem. V'haraya, that's something that the Chachamim will makel about when it comes to pasibirois. So therefore, just because Rav said that we don't use the eitzah of a tzuras pesach benigayah to a larger opening than 10 amas, it doesn't mean that you can't use it benigayah to paretz merub ala oimid. Paretz merub ala oimid is less of a problem. Over there, maybe Rav would agree that I could use a tzuras pesach. Let's bring a raya to this point that we just said, that a tzuras pesach will work if it's paretz merub ala oimid. So the Gemara brings a brayso. What does it say here? Defanois halolu. So you have the walls, sherubon psachim v'chalonis, the walls of a chatzar that are mostly openings, doors, and windows, like the case that we just spoke about. So the brayso says, mutter, you're allowed to carry in this chatzar, ubulvad sheyehei oimid meruba ala paretz. As long as what's closure is more than what's a breach. So the Gemara immediately asks, the brayso doesn't make sense, it contradicts itself. Sherubon salkedaitach, Could you say that we're talking here about a case that most of it is closed? What did it say right in the beginning of the Braisa? So it's Ruban, that most of it is Psachim v'chaloines. Again, Sheruban Solkadaitach goes in the beginning of the Braisa. It says that most of it is windows and doorways. No, so if most of it is windows and doorways, so that means that most of it is parts. Most of it is open. And right after that, what did it say in the Braisa? Ubulvad, that it's oimid merub ala paretz. There has to be more closure than paretz. How could that be? If most of it is windows and doorways, so then most of it is open. So you have to read this Braisa differently. Elo Eime, the pshat in this Braisa is Sheriba behen psachim v'chaloines. There are many, not that there's more. There's many windows and doorways, but ubulvad shehei oimid merube ala paretz. But you have to have the closure more than what's paretz. So what do you see over here? Even though you have a tzuras HaPesach, nevertheless, a tzuras HaPesach does not count as a closure in a case where it's paretz merubah ala oimid. You can use a tzuras HaPesach for higher than or for wider than 10 amis, but you can't use it for paretz merubah ala oimid. That's why it says it that it has to be oimid merubah ala paretz. So we have a raya that it's not a comparison. So Rav Kahana says, no, not necessarily as a raya from that Braisa. Why? Ki Tanya hi, over there, when it's talking about, when it has openings and it has a tzuras HaPesach, it's not talking about a regular tzuras HaPesach. What is it talking about? Bepische shimoi. It's a tzuras HaPesach that's not proper, that's not good. What does this mean? So the Gemara says now two opinions, what that means. My pischi shimoi, what does it mean? Openings that are not proper openings. Plibar of the Chumi v'Rav Yosef. Chadamar, the leslahu shakfi. One says it doesn't have proper sides. So if you take a look in picture Kuf Yud Beis, you can see what this means. It doesn't have the regular tzura of a tzuras HaPesach, which is smooth. It's open, it's in, out, as you see here in picture Kuf Yud Beis. So it's not a proper tzuras HaPesach. It's interesting, Taisus actually brings from Rabbeinu Chananel that the pshat of Pischei Shimoi means, Shimoi is Meloshen Sham in Eretz Yisrael. Because Kanira in Eretz Yisrael, they built openings in such kind of ways where the mezuzahs of the Pesach were not smooth, it was in this way. So it says Shimoi goes on Eretz Yisrael. That's one pshat. Another pshat the Gemara says, V'chad Omar the lesluhu tikra. We're talking about a tzuras HaPesach that's not a full tzuras HaPesach. It has the sides, but it doesn't have the top. As you see over here, that picture you can see in Rashi, right? Or you can see it in picture Kuf Yud Gimel. It has an opening without the top. And therefore, this kind of tzuras HaPesach will not work in a case where it's paretz merubah ala oimid. But maybe if it has a full, proper tzuras HaPesach, maybe it would work for paretz merubah ala oimid. So we don't have a raya from here. Now the Gemara goes back to the statement that Rav himself said. So what did Rav say? If it's wider than 10 amis, tzuras HaPesach does not work for that. V'af Rav Yechanan Savalo. Rav Yechanan agrees to this opinion of Rav as well. Lahad Rav. Dam Rav Baravad Dam Rav Yitzchak. Maise ba'adam echad mi bikas beis Chursam. There was an incident with a person that came from the valley of Beis Chursam. So here we're going to be talking about the halacha of kilayim. Just like you have the halacha of making mechitzas regarding Shabbos, there's also a halacha of making mechitzas regarding kilayim. If you put up mechitzas around your vineyard, you're allowed to plant any zrayim, any vegetables right outside of that vineyard, even mamish right near it. Because as long as there's a mechitzah there, so it separates it, so in the appearance of how it looks, it's a separate thing. So you're allowed to plant right outside Zrayim. So this person went ahead. What did he do? Shenoatz dalet kondesen. He basically put 4 poles on the 4 corners of his vineyard. Be'arba pinis asada, and the 4 corners of his field. Umasach zmoira aleim. And then he stretched out branches. Across these poles, he stretched out branches. So now, what do you basically have? If you want, you could take a look in picture Kuf Yud Dalet. So you basically have a tzuras HaPesach on all 4 sides, right? Because you have the poles, and then you have the branches that he spread out from one pole to the other pole. Okay, so you have a tzuras HaPesach on all 4 sides. Is this good or not? To separate the klayim, to separate the vineyard from what you want to plant outside. This came in front of the Chachamim. And they said, yeah, for klayim, this is a good enclosure. This is a good tzuras HaPesach. V'amar Reish Lakish, and Reish Lakish said, Kederech she'hitiru lo le'inyan klayim, just like they said that this is good regarding klayim, kach hitiru lo le'inyan Shabbos. The same thing, this kind of enclosure, this kind of atzuras HaPesach would work for Shabbos as well. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, but Rabbi Yochanan argued and said, Leklayim hitiru lo. For Klayim this is good, but le'inyan Shabbos lo hitiru lo. But regarding Shabbos, using such a kind of atzuras HaPesach would not be good. So now the Gemara is going to try to figure out, wait a minute, why would a Tzuras HaPesach not be good for Shabbos? Tzuras HaPesach works for Shabbos. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about a Tzuras HaPesach that's b'chlal not a proper Tzuras HaPesach? Why not? Because he didn't put the top of the Tzuras HaPesach on top of the poles. He put them in the middle of the poles. Take a look in picture Kuf Tes Vav. See there? Instead of placing the branches across on top, he placed the branches further down. So because it wasn't placed properly. So therefore it's not going to be a good Tzuras HaPesach for Shabbos. If that's what we're talking about, so the le'asav le'klum. So this can't be Ilaim again. Ilaim minatzad va'omer av chista. Tzuras HaPesach she'asa minatzad. A Tzuras HaPesach where you place the cross beams, not on the top, but on the side, le'asav le'klum. It's nothing. It doesn't work for anything. It doesn't work for Kalayim either. So Rabbi Yochanan wouldn't say that it doesn't work for Shabbos. Reish Lakish wouldn't say that it works for Kalayim. It doesn't work for anything, not for Kalayim, not for Shabbos, according to everybody. Elo, what are we talking about? Al Gabon. We're talking about a Tzuras HaPesach where you made a proper Tzuras HaPesach. He put the branches on top of the poles. Ubemai. So now what are we talking about? If it's only 10 amis or less than 10 amis, in such a case, Rabbi Yochanan is going to say that it's not a good Tzuras HaPesach. Why not? We know by Shabbos that Tzuras HaPesach works if it's up to 10 amis. What we're talking about over here is that this Tzuras HaPesach that you made on your vineyard was wider than 10 amis. And therefore, what was Rabbi Yochanan saying? Because the Tzuras HaPesach is wider than 10 amis, it doesn't work for Shabbos. So here we see that Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rav, that wider than 10 amis, the Tzuras HaPesach doesn't work. And that's why he's arguing on Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says it does work for Shabbos, and Rabbi Yochanan says it doesn't work for Shabbos. So the Gemara, no, not necessarily. Loi, this is not a raya. Lo'olam be'eser. Really, I could say it's not wider than 10 amas. We're talking about a Tzuras HaPesach that's only 10 amas. U'min atzad. And we're going back to what we said before, it's not a proper Tzuras HaPesach. We're talking about a Tzuras HaPesach where he placed the cross branches further down. U'b'darav chista kamiflegi. And they're arguing in this statement that Rav Chisda said. Rav Chisda is only an Ameira. So Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are arguing about the statement of Rav Chisda. This that Rav Chisda said that it's not a proper Tzuras HaPesach. So here Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan argue about this. Right? So Reish Lakish says that that it is good. It's good for Kalayim and it's also good for Shabbos. And Rabbi Yochanan is saying no, it's only good for Kalayim, but it's not good for Shabbos. So they're arguing taka about this point, about this Tzuras HaPesach where the branches are in the middle. Sagt the Gemara weiter, V'Rami, the Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan. So now we see over here a machlokes between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, b'negeya to this case in the field regarding Kalayim, regarding Shabbos, when you make this kind of Tzuras HaPesach. So here there's a stira in the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan from another statement of Rabbi Yochanan, V'Rami Reish Lakish ad Reish Lakish. And there's also a contradiction from what Reish Lakish said here to what Reish Lakish said in another place. The Amar Reish Lakish Mishum Rabbi Yehuda bar Rav Chanina. Reish Lakish said in the name of Rabbi Yehuda bar Chanina, Peya. So this lashon that the Gemara says Peya, Rashi says it means this exact case that we were just talking about. A person that places the poles in the corners, and then on top he puts those branches. It's called Peya, Rashi says, because you have these branches. These branches are usually spread out. If you want to use these branches, you sort of have to intertwine them to make them a little thinner, and then use them as poles, as cross beams across on the top. So therefore, it's called peya because you're sort of you're combining them and you're making it thin that it should be able to be used. So this case that we just spoke about. So what did he say? Muteres le'inyan klayim. It could be used, it's good for Kalayim, avaloi l'Shabbos, but it can't be used for Shabbos. This kind of a Tzuras HaPesach. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says, K'mechitzes l'Shabbos deloi, just like it can't be used for Shabbos as a Tzuras HaPesach, as a mechitza, kach mechitzes l'Kalayim deloi. So too, for Kalayim, it can't be used as a mechitza. So we have a contradiction over here. What did it say before? Rish Lakish held that it could be used both for Kilayim and it could be used for Shabbos as well. Over here he's saying Avolayla Shabbos. Right? And Rabbi Yechanan's opinion is also a contradiction because Rabbi Yechanan before said that for Kilayim it could be used, but it can't be used for Shabbos. Now he's saying it can't be used not for Kilayim and not for Shabbos. So the Gemara says as follows. The contradiction in Rish Lakish is not a question. Before he was saying his own opinion, and now he was quoting in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Chanina, one of his rabbis. So that's not a question. But the contradiction in what Rabbi Yechanan said is a question. So the Gemara, no, so how are we going to answer this? Now if you're going to say that before, the first case, Hasam al Gabon, there we're talking about a proper Tzuras HaPesach, where the cross beams are on the top. So that's over there, it was al Gabon. So therefore it works for Kilayim. Therefore Rabbi Yechanan said it could work for Kilayim because it's a proper Tzuras HaPesach. It's taka wider than 10, so it doesn't work for Shabbos, but it's on top, so it works for Kilayim. Hacha min atzad, and over here we're talking, and over here when Rabbi Yechanan said that it's not a good Tzuras HaPesach, not for Shabbos and not for Kilayim, over here he put it lower down, so it's not good at all, so shaper. So then you have an answer. It's two different cases. But if you're going to say like we wanted to say before, that idi v'idi min atzad, that the case before is also not a proper Tzuras HaPesach because the branches were lower down. And over here it's also talking about min atzad, so what's going to be your answer? You have a contradiction in the opinion of Rabbi Yechanan. Does this Tzuras HaPesach work for Kilayim or not? Before Rabbi Yechanan said it works for Kilayim, and now we're saying that it doesn't work for Kilayim. And for the Gemara, L'oilam idi ve'idi min atzad. No, I can tell you in both cases, it's talking about a Tzuras HaPesach where it was made, the branches going across are lower down. So what's the difference? Hasam be'eser. Before, we were talking about a Tzuras HaPesach that's only 10 amas wide. Hacha b'yesem eser. Over here, we're talking about a Tzuras HaPesach that's more than 10 amas wide.
Maybe that doesn't work for Kilayim either.
Right, that's the Chiddush of the Gemara right now. Until now, we were discussing this measurement of 10 amas or more than 10 amas b'negei to Shabbos. That's an issue if it's too wide for Shabbos. Now the Gemara is being mechadish that this difference of the measurement of 10 amas or more than 10 amas is also an issue b'negei to Klayim. So the Gemara asks, where do you see regarding Klayim that there's a difference if it's 10 amas or more than 10 amas? So the Gemara, I'll bring you the source. Rabbi Yechanan told Rish Lakish regarding this case. Wasn't there a story following? Shahalach Rabbi Yeshua Eitzel Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri lilmid Torah. Rabbi Yeshua went to learn Torah by Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri. So Afal Pisha Baki Behilchas Klayim, even though Rabbi Yeshua himself was very Baki in the halachas of Klayim, but nevertheless he came to learn from him. Umatza, and he found Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri sheyeshiv bein eilonis. He's sitting outside between the trees. Umasach zmeire me'ilon le'ilon, and he spread out a branch from one tree to another tree to make this Tzuras HaPesach, to make this separation from the vineyard from the rest of the field, and he's measuring it. He's measuring it to see, does it have 10 amas? Does it have more than 10 amas? V'amaloi, and he said to him, Rebbe, if you have a vineyard over here, ma'ol izrayakan. Are you allowed to plant other vegetables over here? Amaloi, so Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri answered Rabbi Yeshua, be'eser mutter. If it's up to 10 amas, then it's allowed. Be'yesem eser aser. But if it's more than 10 amas, it's not allowed. So you see very clearly over here that Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri told Rabbi Yeshua that this measurement of 10 and more than 10 is also b'negeya to Kilayim. So b'maya skinon, what are we talking about? Ilema al gabon, if we're talking about a Tzuras HaPesach, a regular Tzuras HaPesach where it's placed on the top, a proper Tzuras HaPesach. If that's the case we're talking about, so then this chiluk, more than 10 and less than 10, would not apply by Kilayim. Yosem esa aser, would it be aser if it's more than 10 amas wide? Well, Tanya, we clearly learned in the Braisa not so. Clearly says, Ha yusham konin hadukronin. If you had over there konin hadukronin means, the Rashi says dukronin means that they're like very pointy. that you can place these poles into the corners, and then they're pointy that you can attach branches, like we're talking about over here. You attach branches across and you make a tzuras HaPesach. V'asal and peya mulmayla. And you created this peya, the Braisa calls it a peya, where you made the branches thin enough to be able to create the tzuras HaPesach around and around. So then the Braisa says, Afile b'yoyse me'eser, even if the space between one pole and another pole is more than 10 amis, mutter. It's okay. So the Braisa clearly says that if it's more than 10, that it's fine. Elo lav minatzad. So the case where Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said that if it's more than 10, that it's a problem. When is it going to be a problem? If the tzuras HaPesach is minatzad. If the tzuras HaPesach, if you put the branch a little bit further down, not on the top, but on the side of the poles. The ka'ama alei, what did Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri say? Be'eser mutter. If the space between the poles is only 10 amas, then it's okay. Yoyse me'eser aser. But if it's more than 10, then it's a problem. Shma mino. So here we see this halacha regarding kilayim. So by kilayim, there's an interesting thing. If it's a proper tzuras HaPesach, where the poles on the top, or the crossbeam on top, is placed on top of the poles, so then even if it's more than 10, it's not a problem. But if it's not a proper tzuras HaPesach, and the crossbeams is placed on that tzad, in the middle sort of, so then it's only if it's up to 10, not more than 10. And that's the answer of the stira of Rabbi Yochanan that we had over here. So Gemara weiter, Gufa, going back to this case that Rav Chisda said. Omer Rav Chisda, tzuras HaPesach she'asua min hatzad, the tzuras HaPesach, where the cross beams is not on top of the poles on the side, but it comes in the middle, lo yasiv lo klum, it's not good. So then it's negei today, by the way, also whenever you make a native. Right? So whenever you make a native, how do you have to make the native? You can't put the string that you put for the native on the side of the pole that you put. You have to place the nail on the top, and you have to attach it to the top of the pole. This is the source of this inyan. That's a proper tzuras HaPesach. A proper tzuras is just, yeah. So if you make it min hatzad, it's not good. Another thing Rav Chisda said, V'amar Rav Chisda, tzuras HaPesach she'omru, the tzuras HaPesach that we're speaking about, what's considered to be a proper tzuras HaPesach? Tzricha shetei bria, the tzuras HaPesach has to be strong enough kedei lahamed ba deles, that you can put up a door in this tzuras HaPesach and it can hold a door. If it's just stam, you put up a paper tzuras HaPesach and it can't hold a door, it's nothing. Has to be strong enough to hold a door.
From the pole itself,
the what? The what?
The string.
The poles that are holding the door have to be, the sides have to be able to hold the door. Yeah, you're right. The top doesn't hold it. Correct. Va'afila, but the Gemara says, what kind of door are we talking about? It doesn't have to be a heavy door at all. Even a door that's made up of straw. Even a very, very, or cushion, what's the type of cushion? You have it over there? A straw, okay. Even a very, very light door, it has to be able to hold up any kind of door. Another halacha regarding the tzuras HaPesach. Tzuras HaPesach tzricha heker tzir. It has to have a heker tzir, a place for the hinges to go in. My heker tzir, what's the place for the hinges? So it's not exactly the way we make hinges today. You have the picture for it. Omer Rav Avya afkesa. It's sort of a hole in the ground that they place the tzuras HaPesach into. Okay, so it has to have, in other words, it has to be a proper tzuras HaPesach that could actually be used as a door. So this is in picture Kuf Tez Zayin. So you see the hole that it makes, that you make in the ground to be able to put it into it. Okay. So to Gemara weiter. Ashkechinu Rav Ache bereid Rav Ivye letalmide de Rav Ashi. So Rav Ache bereid Rav Ivye found the talmidim of Rav Ashi. Amalahu Amamar Midi b'tzuras HaPesach. Did Rav Ashi say anything? Did he give any limitations, any qualifications about the tzuras HaPesach? Amrulei leyamav leklum. No, he actually didn't give any of these qualifications. So in other words, Rav Ashi argued with what they said over here in the name of Rav Yanai, that it has to have this afkesa, has to have this hole for the hinges. He didn't agree with this. Tana, we learned in Abraise, tzuras HaPesach shamru, the tzuras HaPesach that works for Shabbos, kana mikan, v'kana mikan, there's a pole from both sides, v'kana al gabeim, and then a pole on the top. And so now the question is, tzrichin liga or ein tzrichin liga? That pole that you place on the top, does it actually have to be touching the poles on the side, or does it not? Even if it's above it, it doesn't have to touch it. Rav Nachman says, ein tzrichin liga. It doesn't have to be right on top of it. Rav Sheshes says, tzrichin liga does have to touch. You can take a look and picture Kuf Yud Zayin. So you have this is very simple. You have the picture where it's right on top, and you picture Kuf Yud Ches, where it's made further up, and it's not right on top of the poles on the side. So this is the machlokes of Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes.
He had before.
Similar thing when he made with a condense. Yeah, when he had nails that went higher up. Correct. Yeah. So sagt the Gemara, Azal Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman went v'avad uvde bei reish galusa k'shmaite, and he did, according to his opinion, by the reish galusa, he made such a kind of tzuras HaPesach where the top crossbeam did not touch the side poles. Amalei Rav Sheshis l'shamis. So Rav Sheshis heard about this. Rav Sheshis told to his mishamish, his servant Rav Gada, which his name was Rav Gada, Zil shloif shadinu. Go take it off, throw it away. It's not good. Didn't want people to use this. So Azal, Rav Gada went, Shalaf, Shadinu, he went. This is the source of Eiruvin. This is it, the Eiruvin Machlekes. It's right here. So Shalaf, Shadinu, he took it off and he threw it away. So what happened? It's not Pashut, he got arrested. Ashkechu, the Bei Reish Galusa. So by the Reish Galusa, they found Rav Gada, Chavshu, they arrested him. Okay, they didn't know who sent him. Rav Sheshis, if they would have known that maybe that Rav Sheshis sent him, they wouldn't have arrested him.
But he didn't do it himself. He sent someone.
Right, Rav Sheshis sent his mishamish. He sent Rav Gada. So also Rav Sheshis now has to get him out of prison. He caused the whole thing. So Rav Sheshis went, come above. He stood there by the door of the prison, Amalei, and he said, he was calling out to Rav Gada, Gada pukta, come out and let's go. Nafak, so they heard that Rav Sheshis is calling him. Now they understood what happened. Nafak v'asa, he came out and he went with them. So they let him go out. Rav Sheshis is calling him. So they have covered for Rav Sheshis. They released him. Now what happened? What's the maskan of this whole story? Do we pass like Rav Sheshis or like Rav Nachman? So the Gemara here is going to bring a braisa where you could learn out from it that Rav Nachman is right. Ashkeche Rav Sheshis l'Rabbi Bar Shmuel. Rav Sheshis found Rabbi Bar Shmuel Amalei, and he asked Rabbi Bar Shmuel, Tani Mar Midi b'Tzuras HaPesach. Did you learn anything that's relevant about the Tzuras HaPesach? Basically about this machlokes between me and Rav Nachman, whether the crossbeam on top has to be right on top or not. Amalei yes, we learned another halacha in Hilchas Mezuzah, and from that halacha by Hilchas Mezuzah, we could learn out something regarding Tzuras HaPesach. What is the halacha of Hilchas Mezuzah? Tanina, we learned in the Braisa, Kippa. If you have a doorway which is like a kippa, which is an arch. You see here the pictures in Rashi, and you have the pictures over here as well. There's going to be various different measurements to this kippa. But let's first start with the basic halacha. You have an arch. Rav Meir mechayev mezuzah. Rav Meir says that it's chayev in a mezuzah. Chachamim paitrim. Chachamim say it's pater of mezuzah. Now, Shavin, everybody will agree that if the bottom part of this doorway, of this arch, has 10 tfachim before it gets to the arch, before it starts slanting, so ragleo, when the Gemara here uses the term ragleo means that part of the doorway before it begins slanting inward. So if there's biragleho 10 tfachim, so then everybody agrees that it will be chayiv. So now the Gemara explains the various different cases that you could have an arch, and when they're arguing, and when they agree. Amar Abaye, so Abaye says, Hakoil Maidim, everybody agrees, Im Gavoya Sada, that if this entire archway is tall 10 tfachim, Ve'ein Biragleo Shloisha, the bottom part of the archway, before it begins slanting, does not even have 3 tfachim. So let me just explain one detail that I forgot to mention. What's the main issue over here with this archway? The issue of the archway is, in order to be chayiv and mezuzah, it has to be tall 10 tfachim, but it has to also be wide 4 tfachim. So over here, it's wide 4 tfachim, but in the place where the archway begins and it starts slanting, so over there, it's not wide 4 tfachim. It slants inward, so it's not wide 4 tfachim. You can take a look in the picture. You see it in the picture over here. Look in the time. No, after that, picture Kuf Chaf Aleph, Kuf Chaf Beis, Kuf Chaf Gimel. Right, so when it begins, so it's only wide 4 tfachim. So when it begins slanting inward, it loses that width of 4 tfachim. So the question is it going to be chayiv and mezuzah when it loses that width? Okay. So the Gemara here explains the machlokes. Again, Abaye is speaking over here. So what does Abaye say? If it's tall 10 tfachim and the bottom part before it begins to slant, you don't even have 3 tfachim that are 4 tfachim wide. Which would be which picture? Picture Kuf Chaf Aleph. Height. The height has to be 10 and the width has to be 4. So in the bottom part of the arch, you don't even have 3 tfachim that are tall, that are wide 4 tfachim. Okay, so that's one case.
So everyone agrees what?
1 second. Inami, everyone would agree in such a case that it's not good. Inami yesh beragleh shloisha. You have 4 tfachim. You have 4 tfachim in the width of 4 tfachim in the height of 3 tfachim. Ve'ein gevaya sara, but the entire archway is b'chlal not tall 10 tfachim. So if you don't have the height of 10 tfachim, so v'loi klum. This is not large enough to be chayiv mezuzah. Everybody would agree this is not chayiv mezuzah. Ki pligi, when is the machlekes? B'yesh b'ragleh gimel, when the bottom part of this archway, the height of 3 tfachim, has the width of 4 tfachim. Ugevoya asara, the total height of the archway is 10 tfachim. But ve'ein roch barba, and the top part of the archway, it doesn't have the width of 4 tfachim. This is picture kuf chav gimel, right? You see picture kuf chav gimel. So you have the width of 4 tfachim in the lower part of the archway, at least 3 tfachim high, but then it starts slanting inward. And when it starts slanting inward, you lose that width of 4 tfachim. But if you go to the tip of the archway, it is 10 tfachim high. So that's the machlekes over here. What's the machlekes all about? So Rab Meir Savar, where am I holding? 1 second. The Yeshba, now the Gemara adds another detail. This archway, we once learned about this in Masechta Shabbos. This archway is big enough that if you want to carve it out, you could carve it out for the full size that it needs. Okay, take a look in Rashi. You have 2 kinds of archways. You have an archway that is very narrow. It's that round archway. You don't have any space to carve it out, because if you're going to carve it out, you're going to break the whole archway. But then you have an archway that on the outside it's square, so you could carve it out. Right, so now the question is, Rab Meir says, we imagine as if you carved it out, and therefore it's chayiv mezuzah. But Rabbanan Savri ain't chayik in lahashlim. You have to treat it as is, and right now in the top part it doesn't have that width, and therefore you're not chayik it. It doesn't have that proper width on the top, so therefore it's not chayiv mezuzah. So what is the Gemara proving of all of this, b'negeya to our case regarding having the kaira on top of the 2 sides? What the Gemara is proving from all of this is, what do you see over here? You can use the top part for the bottom 2 sides, even though it doesn't really connect, because the top part is not really wide enough. So therefore it's not right on top, because there has to be a chaykik and lahashlim. It's not right on top of the 2 sides. Right where that slant starts, so it's sort of that part it's considered to be removed, because over there it's not wide enough. But nevertheless, I use the tip of the archway, which does have the height, and I combine that together with the 2 sides, even though it's not considered to be attached. So from here, Rabbi Bar Shmuel, who was it? Rabbi Bar Shmuel proved the same thing when he get to the Tzuras HaPesach on Shabbos, that even if the top is not right on top of the 2 sides, it's going to be good. Like Rav Nachman's opinion.
Isn't that only Rab Meir that holds the
And a Chanami, yeah, but it's a Raya also according to the Rabbanan. I'll have to look soon, but I think it's a Raya even according to the Rabbanan. On Malay, so Rav Sheshes heard this raya. Rav Sheshes said, if you find the people from the Reish Galusa, loy taimaluhu lebei Reish Galusa. Don't tell the people of Reish Galusa about this raya that you have. Loy taimaluhu lebei Reish Galusa v'loy midi. Don't mehamas nita the kippah from this brayse. Because then they'll see that they'll rearrest Rav Gada for taking down the Eiruvin that was not put up properly. So don't tell them this brayse, this raya that you have. Okay, but he was made though. Rav Sheshes was made. Basically, Rav Sheshes said, I'll tell them, I'll settle with them, but don't go and master on me. Then there's going to be a problem. Okay, Ad Khan.
By Klayim, what's the purpose of the mechitza?